When I was 5 years old, I went over to my cousin's house and was introduced to the wonderful world of video games through Super Mario 64. After playing around in the castle courtyard and learning the controls, he directed me to the first area of the game, Babam Battlefield. I still remember how much fun I had running around in this level, playing around with the cannons, avoiding the chain chomp, flying around with the wing cap, and jumping over these rolling boulders while climbing the mountain. And the entire time I was doing this, my cousin kept trying to direct me towards the Koopa at the start of the level I was supposed to race to the top of the mountain for a star. At the time, I didn't really see a reason to do that. I was having fun just running around and going from place to place. This was a strange new world I'd never seen anything like before, and I wanted to just spend time playing around in it. Well, it's been 20 years since the release of Super Mario 64, and gaming has changed. The long-awaited space exploration game No Man's Sky has finally arrived. As a result, video gaming has been saved. We can all abandon our horrible, boring lives and become the astronauts we all wanted to be when we were toddlers. We never have to go outside ever again except to buy more potato chips and soda. We can cancel all future government programs to research space and put it in Apache No Man's Sky to make it even better. We have reached the peak of human creation, and nothing else could ever... Oh. The truth is, No Man's Sky has launched to a divisive reception, which makes sense considering the massive amount of attention and hype it received at every major gaming event in the past few years. The excitement leading up to this game was impossible for anything to live up to. Up until the release of this game, the common question everyone was asking about No Man's Sky was, what do you do in it? It turns out not much you haven't done elsewhere. Aside from exploration, the game's main focus is on survival and crafting, both of which are simple enough but involve a lot of meter management and resource harvesting. You can also participate in the galactic market and get into spaceship battles, but those are pretty bare-bone mechanics too, especially when compared to other dedicated space simulation games. By now you're probably wondering what Mario 64 has to do with any of this, or maybe you're wondering why this asshole is making fun of your trademark diet of potato chips and soda. Well, as it turns out, I too have played No Man's Sky while shoving potato chips and soda into my disgusting mouth, and like many people who are opinionated and obnoxious enough to have a YouTube channel, I have strong feelings about it as well. I'll come back to Mario 64 at a later time. I guess I should start out by saying that I had no real anticipation or excitement going into this game. I had no expectations going in that could leave me feeling disappointed or betrayed. The only reason I even bought the game in the first place was because I saw that the limited edition was on sale on Amazon Prime for the same price as the regular game. As a result, I think I ended up enjoying my time with No Man's Sky more than the average person. From what I've personally seen, I appear to be on the more positive end of the spectrum when discussing the game's quality. That being said, I think the game's Metacritic score is a perfect representation of the game. I think No Man's Sky is overall a pretty okay game. Not great, not good, but okay. Even ignoring the game crashing an absurd number of times during my time with it, I would say that the gameplay of No Man's Sky is flawed in some serious ways. I will admit that I'm not the type of person who generally cares about crafting and survival elements in games, but even looking past my personal bias, I don't think that the game handles these mechanics in a way that truly engages those who even do. After a few hours, you've most likely encountered every type of landmark at least once, and since there's little to no variation of those landmarks, the feeling of excitement and curiosity you start the game out with when interacting with them fades pretty quickly. Upgrading your equipment is a slow and tedious process that can take hours to fully appreciate the reward of. In general, the core gameplay loop of material collecting, crafting, shooting, and flying doesn't take long to feel repetitive. All of these are problems, and I wouldn't blame anyone for not liking the game because of them. To some extent, I'm surprised I don't feel the same way. I dislike a lot of Bethesda-developed Western RPGs for similar reasons. I'm not a fan of quantity over quality arguments, or justifying mediocre writing and unpolished gameplay with the large size of a game's world. On average, I would rather have a high-quality but small game over a large game that is forced to make compromises. What No Man's Sky has taught me about myself is that if you manage to make a game impractically large enough and pretty enough to look at, those feelings go right out the window. For the first time since I was a child playing Mario 64 who had no understanding of technology and how games worked, I felt completely entranced by the desire to explore a fictional space larger than I could ever imagine. What keeps me going back to this game again and again is that feeling of discovery and wonder from planet to planet. There's no real story, but I'm finding a strange satisfaction in picking up random bits of history, culture, and language from the various alien species that inhabit the galaxy. Even the simple act of walking around and finding beautiful landscapes is enough to hold my attention. No Man's Sky has almost no real objectives. You have a couple of loose waypoints that apparently lead to some sort of conclusion, and reaching one of those waypoints has been just enough of an excuse to keep me playing. I've seen a lot of comparisons to Dwarf Fortress and its adventure mode. Both games exist within a massive procedurally generated world and ask the player to make their own fun out of it. That being said, the worlds of Dwarf Fortress are brimming with life, full of villages and cities with individually named NPCs to give you quests and join you on your journey. No Man's Sky's planets are mostly barren landscapes and leave the player feeling isolated and lonely. Mechanically speaking, the history, politics, questing, combat, and conversation systems of Dwarf Fortress eclipse anything No Man's Sky offers in terms of complexity and depth. Another game I've seen comparisons drawn to is Proteus. It makes sense given both games are about exploration and promise a relaxing atmosphere. But I think there's an even better comparison. No Man's Sky reminds me most of an obscure Japan-only PS1 game by the name of LSD Dream Emulator. Despite claims of the title having nothing to do with the drug, it might as well because this game is fucked up. The game is based on the dream journal of an artist, and the entirety of its gameplay revolves around exploring various fantastical areas before waking up and moving on to the next night's dream. While there are only a finite amount of locations, the events that occur within each dream are randomized. Eventually, the game will start to randomly change the textures and sound effects in each area. Looking back, I'd be comfortable retroactively calling this game an early example of a walking simulator before that term came to be used. While it lacks a traditional narration or story as is common for games of that genre, I would argue that it does have a very basic style of environmental storytelling to it. You can't help but start to wonder what life experiences led up to these dreams. Whether or not that was the developer's intention, I can't say, but my point is that the closest experience I could compare to my lonely, contemplative time with No Man's Sky is LSD the Dream Emulator. LSD has a small but dedicated cult following, and what makes me sad is that in an alternate world where No Man's Sky wasn't marketed in the way that created impossible expectations and was sold for maybe $30 instead of $60, I could see it enjoying the same type of niche success that LSD did. Perhaps the unfortunate reality of the situation is that due to the size of the game and the difficult nature of describing its appeal to the average person, the marketing and price of the game were a necessary evil. And I think that really sucks, because even though I bought the game for $60 and I feel like I got my money's worth, I'm definitely the exception and not the norm. To me, No Man's Sky is a technical and creative experiment that I find impressive not only as a person interested in what the video game medium can do, but as a former computer science student as well. I've been playing for maybe 20 or so hours, and every planet I've encountered thus far has been one that I've discovered before anyone else. The fact that can even be achieved by a modern-day video game is something I find amazing. I'd love to see future games use some of the ideas on display here in their own gameplay, and maybe provide a similar experience with a bit more of a focused direction. No Man's Sky begs the player to use their imagination to fill in the details of their adventure, and I can only hope that imagination sparks something special in the minds of game developers. Maybe there could be a game like Papers, Please, but as a worker on a space station inspecting the documentation of incoming spaceship pilots. Or something like Sid Meier's Pirates, but in space and with a galaxy so large you'd never run out of places to plunder. But even then, I think there is value to be had in games where you play as an undefined entity with undefined goals. In the same way that a book asks the reader to imagine how a scene looks and sounds, I don't see any problem with No Man's Sky asking you to imagine the context surrounding your travels. Sure, No Man's Sky does have a very light background story and loose objectives to follow, but never does the game state who you are, why you're a spaceship pilot, or what you were even doing before you as the player took control of the character. In many circles, the idea of a game having no narrative or gameplay goals is seen as something to be laughed at or criticized. Many hardcore gaming enthusiasts challenge whether or not these games should even be considered video games at all. In my opinion, excluding these experiences from being considered part of the medium is unnecessarily limiting. While most traditional video games have objectives and challenges that progress and define the gameplay and story, I don't think that structure should define the medium of video games, in the same way I don't think you can define what a movie is based off the standard 3-act structure either. To me, video games are defined by their interactivity, however minor it may be. I don't see why player-driven exploration and imagination in and of itself can't be considered enough of a satisfying reward to be the main focus of a game. In a medium where freedom, nonlinearity, and choice are celebrated, I find it fascinating so many people are against the idea of tapping into the unlimited possibilities of their own mind to fill in details. When approaching No Man's Sky with that attitude, there is great potential to experience something incredibly personal, rewarding, and meditative. Sadly, reality doesn't always live up to potential. While I can sit here and praise No Man's Sky as a wonderful stepping stone and an interesting new direction for certain types of games to take, the fact remains that those expecting a traditional video game experience are probably going to walk away at least somewhat disappointed. Sure enough, in the middle of writing this video, news came out reporting that the PC version of the game has experienced a massive 90% player drop-off rate. I think No Man's Sky is like a video game lava lamp. It's relaxing and pretty to look at, but how much enjoyment one gets out of that will vary wildly from person to person. And even then, it'd be hard for me to recommend over something like Proteus, which is going to run you $50 cheaper as of this recording. Looking back on Super Mario 64 20 years after its release, I find myself amused by how small these levels really are compared to your average game nowadays. Sure, I still have fun playing through Bob-omb Battlefield like I did as a kid, but what was once an amazing whole new world for me to play in has become a rather dated snapshot of gaming history. The idea that 20 years from now, someone who played No Man's Sky as a child could look back on it and have the same feeling is something I find beautiful.